title this morning is Christ Consciousness at Christmas. And indeed, as it always comes to be, all the ideas shared here so far today are a part of that Christ consciousness. The history of Christmas is actually long and complicated. According to Britannica, biblical scholars believe the birth of Jesus to have been around 4 to 6 BC. That's quite a lengthy time they're giving in there. Although historians say the first Christmas was originally celebrated in Rome around 336 BC, and it didn't become a Christian holiday until much later in the 9th century. It was not popularized until much later than that even, as the Puritans, who were a major group in the founding of the early United States, considered it anti-Christian and indulgent. In fact, the Massachusetts government banned Christmas in 1659. Christmas finally became a federal holiday about 200 years later in 1870. So we can see that Christmas has run its course through many opportunities. Washington Irving wrote extensively about Christmas and about St. Nicholas in particular, and his work helped to reshape the holiday into one of family time, community, and giving. So how do we in New Thought think of Christmas? The first answer that usually comes to my mind when anyone asks me a question about New Thought teachings or Science of Mind teachings is that perhaps each one of us thinks a little differently. And that can be a very good thing, I think. We each have different rituals and traditions. The word Christmas comes from Old English, which means Christ's Mass. And that refers to an actual religious ceremony. However, in New Thought, we would consider Christmas an inner ceremony for spiritual awakening of the Christ. Awakening of the Christ consciousness within each one of us. Christ, meaning the universal principle or divine consciousness, means that we view Christmas as a time to recognize the spiritual birth of the divine in the hearts and minds of all people. And in our teaching, we especially emphasize loving kindness, oneness, and the self-givingness of spirit unfolding within each one of us, as we each have the potential to realize our Christ nature.
I believe that some of the challenges many of us have with most world religions today is that they have not progressed from the superstitions of the times of their inception. The teachings of Jesus are as relevant today as they were then, but the Bible stories and other religious texts quite often are based on archaic worldviews, and they're not really relevant to our times today. Remember that Hinduism started in 1900 BC, and Judaism in 1500 BC, and Buddhism started in the 5th century BC. Christianity started in the 1st century, as we all know. Islam didn't start until the 7th century AD. Converse to that, René Descartes and Isaac Newton didn't develop scientific method until the 1600s, quite a bit of time after all these religions started. And quantum science began in the early 1900s, and yet many of our general beliefs are based on antiquated worldviews. Some of our strongest held values are based on times when people believed the world was flat. and a lot of our basic belief systems and the things that kind of control our lives are still based in those times. Remember, at the time of Jesus, we all know that they didn't have inside plumbing or electricity. But did you know? Bathing was not viewed as necessary. In fact, it wasn't believed to be good for you. Nearly 80% of the population lived in poverty. Women outnumbered men about 2 to 1 due to work-related death, disease, and violence. So girls were often promised to multiple men to compensate for the odds of survival of men that they would be available to them. Mortality rates were high, and the average lifespan was less than 40 years. We often think Jesus dying at a young age of 33 was odd, but was actually quite common in his day. A 50-year-old was a rarity, and a 60-year-old was ancient. Childbirth and child rearing began as soon as possible, and infant mortality was 60%. So women gave birth at least annually in hopes of producing a sizable enough family that they could work for survival. Perhaps the greatest miracle in the Christmas story may have been that Mary was not put to death when it was discovered that she was pregnant. The killing of young women for infidelity and adultery was really actually quite common, because women were merely vessels of transmission. They were there to produce children. In other words, they were property, and once their ability to do that was no longer available, they were no longer needed. In regard to the no room in the inn in Palestine at the time was a fairly large room with shelves cut into the walls. And when the beds were filled, surrounding fields were offered at a reduced rate. And as a last resort, or in cold weather, the stable was available. Oxen and donkeys were kept inside in a windowless room attached to the inn. The lack of windows allowed the heat from the animals to warm the guests. The poorest of the poor were jammed in with the animals. Dozens of people would huddle in these dark, dirty rooms overnight. The poorest of the poor were tradespeople like carpenters, shepherds, and traveling sorcerers called magi. Prostitutes and tax collectors would be welcome in the inn because they could pay. It would not be unusual on any given night to find travelers elbow to elbow with shepherds and those who dabbled in magic. Does this sound familiar? Is this not the picture of the nativity scene that we see every Christmas? All huddled together in a manger? Early Catholic scholars painted a rather different version of Mary and Joseph, and few of their descriptions are found in Scripture. Most of the Catholic doctrine comes from mystic experience and divine revelation. The article I read said, "There is an amazing reverence and respect in the Catholic Mariology, but little true scholarship." Understanding the concept of Christ consciousness the way Jesus taught it makes it all relevant and usable for all of us. Okay, I was asked recently how I square my personal beliefs with Christian holidays. The implication was that not being specifically or exclusively Christian when dealing with Christian doctrine, it must be challenged to maintain more inclusive spiritual principles without being hypocritical. That stung a little bit. It's important to preface the question with the fact that this friend was questioning his own belief systems, not mine, and not questioning my integrity, so I could disregard the hypocritical part of the question and not take it personally. There are a lot of illogical, mysterious miracles in the Christmas story, and from a logical, scientific point of view, it's incongruous to fully embrace all the elements of the holiday traditions, like a virgin birth, the guiding star, traveling wise men, visiting angels, and not to mention the little drummer boy or talking animals. The best answer I could give to that question was that I love the stories of Jesus, and I don't have to buy into all the miracle stories to believe the basics about his teachings. I don't teach religious doctrines and theology. I teach spiritual philosophy. If we look at the holidays' traditions as symbols that represent deeper meaning, we can rationalize the season and approach it from a more intellectual point of view and a more meaningful point of view, I believe. My problem with miracle stories is that they require us to assume illogical occurrences as truth, implying that blind faith is more important than logic. I personally prefer Einstein's assessment when he says, there are only two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, the other is though everything is a miracle. And I actually prefer to combine both sides of that statement, realizing this is not an either-or statement. To know that there are laws that govern our existence, and yet I can live in an open-ended, open-minded existence in which everything is possible, and I can use natural laws to do seemingly miraculous things. That was what Jesus taught, and that is the core point of Christ consciousness. He was the great example, and everything he could do, we can do as well, as he said. So, would you think maybe Jesus was an early Einstein?
So as we look at, David's brought us around to the idea of the Christ nature. So let's talk about what that means for each one of us as we move into Christmas and have the opportunity to give birth to that Christedness within us, because we always have that choice. Your awareness of God within you is not only your awareness of it, but also its awareness of you. Now I'm going to say that again because that's a profound statement. Your awareness of God within you is not only your awareness of it, but also its awareness of you. They are one and the same. Our consciousness of ourself is God's consciousness of us. While it may be impossible to describe divine consciousness, we are able to understand it because we are allied with it. It is who we are. Our entire being consists of different states of consciousness. An inner transformation occurs as we give birth to a new state of consciousness. Jesus did not depend on any condition to make his determinations in life. He reached through the seen into the unseen, and there he consciously recognized his arrival of oneness with the spiritual cause of all things. Do not permit the weeds of wrong concepts to choke your divine natural state of being. Do not succumb to ideas of being poor, miserable, sick, fearful, weak, or unhappy, when right there where you are, right here where you are, and right now, you have the inborn gift of consciously rising above. As you sense the Spirit of Christ within, both instinctively and intuitively, let it guide. Let it guide you toward the transcendence of the human experience, because that is what Jesus totally was about. Ernest Holmes gave us these words. He said, "Listen to the silence until it speaks. and sit in the darkness until you see light. It's quite obvious in our teachings of the science of mind and spirit that Dr. Holmes wanted to ensure that each one of us always remember the Christ that resides within us. He taught, as Jesus had many years before, that knowing that the divine lives within us as a love and as a law is life-affirming, life-sustaining, and life-transforming. He wrote and spoke extensively about this divine idea. So what I've done is taken a huge amount of his writings and teachings, and I've condensed them, and I'm going to now share with you my paraphrased version of better understanding the Christ within. Christ is born within us as our human self gives way to the divine. When we recognize that God within us and we stay focused with it, in it, as it. Jesus demonstrated this as he spoke with authority, knowing he dealt with impersonal law. And what has been done by one, by Jesus, can be done by others, by you and by me, provided that we too know how and do comply with law. And that is true because Christ is not limited to any one person. Each of us is as eternal as God is. Each is God's idea of his own self-knowingness. Jesus thought of the Spirit as being personal to him and directly responding to him, to his thought, to his knowings. And Jesus located God in his own soul, which is opposed to somewhere in the vastness of space, as many others have taught and still teach today. Jesus was unable to find a place where he began and God left off. And this is a golden key to not only understanding, but also demonstrating our Christedness. Christ, or as Ernest Holmes called it way back in his day, the perfect man, and I'm going to add the perfect woman to that statement. So Christ, the perfect person, develops within us through the realization and revelation of the self to the self. Once again, I say it is an inside job, and we get to do it. Everyone is a potential Christ, and as yet undeveloped divinity. So how do we develop our divinity? How do we uncover our Christ nature? Well, first and foremost, some very important words from this teaching. Begin where you are. We are each on the path where we are. We each have hurdles to jump, but we are developing, and we know the truth, and we can return to it in any given moment. So Jesus gave us these words. He said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And I'm going to tell us that not only is he the way, the truth, and the life, but you are, I am, we are. Each one of us is the way, the truth, and the life. The answers are within us. we consciously reach God through our own nature, in the secret chamber of our own heart, the secret place of the Most High, where one all-inclusive, all-penetrating unity of everything resides. Dr. Holmes, when speaking once in the month of December, said this month we celebrate the birth of him who we think to have been the greatest spiritual genius who ever lived. Jesus brought something new to the world. He brought a gift for all of us. He brought the value of the individual life and the relationship of the individual to the universal. He taught two great universal truths. One, we are surrounded by a divine presence which presses against us everywhere. There is no spot where God is not. And two, we are surrounded by a universal law of intelligence which is creative. It is done unto us as we believe. We are in a very intimate relationship, a divine partnership with the infinite. Although it sounds simple, this profound idea must be integrated. Embody the full nature of your perfection. Recognize the nature of things as they really are. Just as Jesus recognized that he is one with God, so must we. This Christmas, give yourself a gift. Give yourself the gift of recognizing and realizing your Christ consciousness. Or not, the choice is yours. And so it is.